All right, kiddos, we have to finish up the rest of the PowerPoint. So we just have a few slides left, and then I'm going to let you have some time to work on your own on the worksheet that I provided for you today. So yesterday we talked about autotrophs, consumers, and decomposers. And we call autotrophs producers, or we call consumers heterotrophs. So those terms can be used interchangeably. So you can see on the board we have three basic classes of organisms: producers, consumers, decomposers. And energy moves through those. So we know that the ultimate source of energy is the sun, goes into producers. Producers then are eaten by consumers, and then consumers and producers are then broken down by decomposers and returned, those materials or those nutrients are returned to the environment to then be used by the producers for the whole cycle to start again, right? So there's a few things of note. First of all, we're going to talk about this quite a few times, so this isn't going to be the last, but where we get energy is from the sun. That's the ultimate source of energy. So we know in an ecosystem that energy can't be recycled. It must constantly be supplied by the sun. And then that's used by autotrophs, aka producers, to make food via photosynthesis, and then we eat that, so on and so forth. But we call ecosystems self-sustaining if materials or nutrients can be recycled between the organisms and the abiotic environment. So do you remember abiotic means non-living? So if we can create that cycle again and again and again, then it would be deemed sustainable. A few examples that we do that rotation back and forth, back and forth, back and forth would be like water, carbon, or nitrogen. We're going to talk about the carbon cycle in 4.3. That's going to be a really big portion of it. So here's a little schematic. You have your sun, which goes to producers, producers to consumers. Either producers or consumers can go to decomposers. And then any of those three, as they cycle through, feed through the decomposers to the nutrient pool, which is then used again by the producers, and the whole thing starts again and again and again. So nutrients promote growth in organisms. I think you know that. Nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, those types of things. Nutrients aren't remade, so they have to be recycled. And they flow through the what we would call food chain, and we're going to talk a lot about that tomorrow, by the decomposers. The decomposers are the things that put it back into the food chain. Again, we also talked about the fact that we lose heat at every level, right? That'll come back again tomorrow when I see you. All right, so again, we call things sustainable when you have that recycling fact. However, when ecosystems are brand new, like an unoccupied habitat, such as like the first island, so the Hawaii Islands, when that lava was flowing and creating an island, or if you totally wipe it out because of a landslide or whatever natural disaster you want to talk about, a tsunami, whatever, and you have bare rocks, bare soil, nothing. It goes through a step-by-step process. It's called succession. And by the end, you get what we call a climax community, and that's the ideal. So here you can see really, really mature trees. You can see some ferns and small fauna down at the bottom. And we know that within those trees and small fauna, there's decomposers. So as branches break off or as things die, whether they're consumers or producers, those decomposers recycle the nutrients that allows the trees to grow, the grass to grow, then the deer to eat the grass, so on and so forth. And we've had these redwood trees that you can see here for millions and millions and millions of years. And so we would call that a really sustainable long period of time, right? And it's all because they've created this climax community. We'll talk more about that later in 4.3, I believe. So just so you know, definition of sustainability is the ability to continue indefinitely. 240 million years, like the redwood forests, would be kind of considered indefinitely, because especially there's no reason that they should be stopping anytime soon. But there's some key requirements. One, you got to have nutrients. If you don't have nutrients, it won't work. Two, you got to be able to get rid of the waste that is produced in the ecosystem. So it's called detoxification of waste. And then three, you have to have energy. If you don't have energy, the whole thing won't work, which means you have to have sunlight. If that stops, then the whole thing would go kaput. So we are going to do an animation. I talked to you about this once you get back from your long weekend, and we're going to set up a mesocosm. And a mesocosm is a enclosed container that hopefully is sustainable. So you can see here kind of how you would set up one in real life, quote unquote. But what we're going to hope to do is animate, in our case, a small closed off experimental setup that can be used to test a variety of things. One, it can just be used to test, is it truly sustainable? Two, it can be used to test a variety of conditions. So extra sunlight, pH, salinity, whatever you want to change within that closed system, you can see how it affects the plants and the protists and things like that within the system. So we're going to be dealing with mesocosms, although it's part of your 4.1 next week, just because it fit way better with Heart Week in our schedule. So what you're going to be looking at today is chi-square, like I told you, and statistical significance, which we've already done. So if you were to go out into the field, which we won't do because there's snow on the ground, but if you were to go out into the field and you were to measure the length of the field by the width of the field and divide those into 10 quadrants, you could then roll dice and you could get a 2 and a 6, which would mean you'd go to the second and you'd go over 6 and you'd drop this little made PVC quadrant down, and then you would count the species of plants, usually, that are within that quadrant. And then you could roll the dice again, and maybe you got a 6 and a 1, so you sample this quadrant right here, and then you roll the dice again and you get a 7 and a 5, which isn't possible with dice, but you get what I'm saying. Anyway, you sample randomly 10 quadrants. You could make your calculator do it, you could make Excel do it, you could draw numbers out of a hat, whatever. You find 10 quadrants and you sample them. And when you sample them, you look at a variety of things. You would look at organisms present. Usually you would identify a type of plant that you want to look at or something like that, and you would count. The goal of that random sampling is to get an estimation of population size based on random samples, clearly. It really doesn't work for things that can move, organisms that can move. Like you couldn't count squirrels in a field based on this quadrant. You'd have to use things that are not modal, meaning they cannot move. They don't have the ability to move. So you're going to draw a contingency table based on the observed frequencies. So males, females, different types of organisms, whatever it is. Were they there? Were they not there? Were they both there? Were neither there? Draw a little table. And then you're going to calculate the frequency. So get the percentage, right? And then you're going to calculate the degrees of freedom, which how many options do we have? Equals degree of freedom. And then you're going to use that table. Again, you're always going to go to the 0.05, which is the 5%. And you're going to go to that degrees of freedom. You're going to go over, and the number that you see will determine if you accept your null hypothesis or you accept your hypothesis. And then again, you're going to use this chi-square value. Remember to do the sum of all the portions. That seems to be easily forgotten. And then just to recap, if it's less than that critical value, that's what CV stands for, then you accept your null hypothesis. And if it's greater than that critical value, then you reject. Those of you that are statisticians, you can fail to accept or accept that, or sorry, fail to reject or reject, if that is easier for you, the null hypothesis. Or otherwise you would say that you accept the alternative hypothesis that you make. Now, I went through that chi-square testing really quick, and the reason why I went through it really quick is because I provided a really cool thing for you. So if you go to Schoology, sorry, this is super lagging. And if you go to right here, it says today in class, you're going to watch this video, which you've already done, and then it says read the attached PowerPoint chi-square example. So I found this textbook, which is better than your book actually at explaining it, and I've crossed out all the stuff that you don't need to read, and I've highlighted the stuff that you should. So it talks about how you do random sampling, what the quadrants are, how you find the random numbers, all that stuff, shows you through it. Woohoo, that's awesome. It then gives you an example problem. So you're looking at the bell heather versus the ling, and you're kind of comparing and counting those two. Here, are they present or absent? You make your little table. You then calculate your results. It then tells you how to find the probabilities, and then the chi-square itself. Then calculate the degrees of freedom, read the table, and get an answer. This is a really helpful example, and I really strongly suggest that you read through this first, because your homework is to, here's some guiding notes at the beginning of the homework, which kind of help you with what the worksheet says, the textbook says, but at the bottom page it says worksheet, data-based questions, chi-square testing. You must complete this individually. I don't care if you work with a group, but you need to submit your own. So there's essentially 8 questions that textbook step by step walks you through how to answer these 8 questions. So it really shouldn't be very complicated, complex by any means. You have the rest of the time to work. Please be diligent, and please do upload this before I see you. Ideally, let's see, would be Thursday. Thanks very much. Bye.